The streetlights on my block have a color they're not supposed to have. Bruised purple, like a knuckle 3 days into healing. I know that color intimately now. From 6 weeks of standing at my own window at 3 in the morning. But I didn't know it on the night this really starts. All I knew that night was a text message that arrived at 3:41 a.m., 6 words long. Thank you for your wakeful contribution. I read it 3 times before it actually landed. Then I looked down at my own hands, and before I tell you why that mattered, before I tell you what I saw underneath my fingernails, I need to back up 6 weeks. Back to the night I found a piece of paper under my windshield wiper and made the worst decision of my life by simply staying awake. My name is Leo, and I haven't slept properly since I was 19. Not trouble sleeping, and not I have a lot on my mind. I mean actual clinical 3 hours a night insomnia. The kind where you start recognizing which infomercials play at 2 a.m. versus which ones play at 4, depending on the season. There was a stretch in my 20s where I could have told you the exact rotation of a rotisserie grill commercial down to the week. I know the creak pattern of my house, settling the way other people know their own heartbeat. I know what my street looks like every hour of the night because I've been awake to see every single one of them for years. Alone with a cup of decaf going cold at the windowsill. Which is exactly why I noticed the flyer immediately. Some things you can only catch because you've already memorized what normal looks like. It was tucked under my wiper blade on a Tuesday, printed on paper heavier than junk mail has any business being. The kind of stock you'd expect on a wedding invitation, not a notice about parking restrictions. No return address, no logo, just a header in a clean, almost clinical font that read Urban Mandate 12-C, followed by language so dry and bureaucratic that at first I assumed it was a joke. A prank from someone in the neighborhood association, maybe, because we'd just spent 3 weeks arguing about a stop sign nobody wanted to pay for. Effective immediately, the flyer said, all residents of the Vantage Ridge community are required to be in a documented state of REM sleep between the hours of 3 a.m. and 3:17 a.m. I laughed out loud reading that. Documented state of REM sleep, as if somewhere there was a filing cabinet with my sleep architecture inside it, cross-referenced and stamped by a man with a clipboard. Item 4B of the mandate listed permissible sleep aids and credited them in the same flat font to the local water supply, as if my tap water had been quietly managing my circadian rhythm for the last 4 years, and nobody had thought to mention it. I texted a photo of the flyer to my friend Darla, who I've known since we worked the same soul-crushing call center job in our early 20s, back when we bonded over both hating the hold music enough to write our own lyrics for it. Darla has always been the practical one in our friendship, the kind of person who reads terms and conditions in full and still finds a reason to distrust them. Someone's bored, she wrote back, or someone in your HOA needs a hobby. I posted the flyer in the neighborhood group chat too, with a laughing emoji, because that felt like the correct amount of concern for a piece of paper telling me when to dream. 3 people responded with variations of LOL, what? One woman, a retired dental hygienist named Corinne, who lived 2 doors down and had once given me an entire unsolicited lecture about flossing technique at a block party. She replied with something stranger. Just one line, no punctuation, no emoji. Just follow it. It's easier that way. Nobody asked her what she meant by that. I wish, more than almost anything else in this story, that someone had. Here's the thing about being told not to do something you are physically incapable of not doing anyway. I don't get to choose whether I'm awake at 3 a.m. My body made that decision for me a long time ago, somewhere around a stressful year I'd rather not relive in detail. So, on the first night the mandate was supposed to be in effect, I did the only thing that made sense to a man who'd spent a decade losing a fight against his own nervous system. I made coffee I didn't need, sat by my window, and watched. At 2:58, the street looked completely ordinary. A neighbor's motion light clicked on for a raccoon crossing the Hendersons' lawn and clicked back off. A car alarm chirped twice as someone locked up for the night. The kind of nothing noise I'd built an entire personality around noticing. At 3 o'clock exactly, the streetlights didn't go out. That, honestly, might have been almost comforting. A power blip I could explain away over breakfast. Instead, they shifted color. All 4 lights on my block sliding from their usual orange sodium glow to a deep, bruised purple. The color of a knuckle 3 days into healing. Not flickering, not dimming, just changing evenly, like somebody had reached down and turned a dial they'd been waiting all week to turn. And then the sound stopped. I don't mean it got quiet. I know quiet. I have lived inside 3 in the morning quiet for the better part of my adult life, and this was not that. This was the air itself thickening, the way it does in the seconds before a summer storm finally breaks, except it never broke. It just sat there, pressing gently against my eardrums for what felt like much longer than 17 minutes. I checked my phone. 3 o'clock and 4 seconds. Then 3 o'clock and 41. Then I made myself stop checking because watching the numbers crawl was somehow worse than simply not knowing how much longer I had to sit inside that pressure. At 3:17, the purple drained back out of the streetlights all at once, and the air let go of my eardrums like something exhaling. I sat there another 20 minutes, just breathing before I trusted myself to try to go to bed. I told Darla about it the next morning over the phone. She was quiet for a second, then asked if I'd been drinking. I told her no, and she believed me, because in 15 years of friendship, she had never once had a reason to think I was the type to make something like that up. That's the part that scared her later. Not that I saw something strange, that I don't lie. On the fourth night, I saw Mrs. Steiner's cat. His name was Biscuit, an enormous orange tabby who had, on multiple occasions, tried to walk directly through my legs as if I was a doorway rather than a person, and who I had genuinely grown fond of, despite constantly finding his fur embedded in every fabric surface I owned. Mrs. Steiner used to joke that Biscuit patrolled the block like he owned the deed to it. That night, Biscuit had wandered onto the sidewalk sometime before 3, and when the lights turned purple, he simply sat down. Didn't run, didn't hiss, just sat, tail curled neatly around his front paws, in that particular way cats have of looking completely unbothered by things that should absolutely bother them. For the first few minutes, nothing happened, and I remember almost feeling relieved, like maybe the cat would just sit there and prove the whole thing was harmless. Then his shadow started to bloom. I don't have a cleaner word for it than that. The shadow beneath him, which should have simply been a flat, dark shape on the concrete, began to sprout along its edges. Thin, jagged extensions, leaf-like, but wrong, thin as paper cuts, growing outward in slow, deliberate pulses. And they moved in time with a low frequency I could somehow feel in my molars before I could consciously register hearing anything at all. I pressed my palm flat against my own jaw without meaning to, like I could physically hold my own teeth still. Biscuit never moved. He sat there while his shadow grew something like antlers made out of wet ink, and the sound that came with it was not a squelch exactly, and not quite a crack either. It was closer to the sound of a knuckle popping under water, small and wet and precise, over and over, in perfect rhythm with the pulse I could feel behind my back teeth. At 3:17, the purple drained out of the streetlights, the pressure in the air released all at once, and Biscuit was gone. In his place was a patch of moss, roughly the size and shape of a sleeping cat, shimmering faintly with a greenish, oily iridescence, the exact color of the inside of a mussel shell. I sat at that window until sunrise. I didn't sleep, not for 1 second. And I want to be very clear that in 10 years of fighting insomnia, that was the first night not sleeping ever felt like the correct decision instead of a curse. Somewhere around 3:10, while Biscuit's shadow was still pulsing against the concrete, I noticed a curtain shift in the house across the street. Just a few inches, just long enough for me to catch the pale shape of someone's face in the gap before the curtain fell back into place. I never found out who lived there. I'd seen that house 1,000 times and never once seen a light on inside it, day or night. Whoever was behind that curtain had been watching too, and whoever it was, they hadn't come out onto the porch, and their curtain never moved again for the rest of the 6 weeks I kept count. I don't know if that means they finally learned to comply, or if it means something worse, and I've decided I'd rather not find out which. I called Darla at 6 a.m. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she hadn't been sleeping great either, for entirely unrelated reasons involving her own toddler. I told her about the cat. There was a long pause on her end, long enough that I asked if she was still there. "I believe you," she said. "I just don't know what you want me to do with that information." Neither did I. The mandate wasn't protecting us from something outside. It was protecting us from the 17 minutes themselves. Something about that window turned the environment mutagenic actively, and I had just watched it happen to a cat I used to complain about because he shed on my porch furniture. I couldn't stop thinking about Corinne's message. Just follow it. It's easier that way. So, on the 6th day, still running on the kind of exhaustion that makes your own front door feel a half a step further away than it actually is, I walked over to hers. She answered wearing garden gloves, even though it was almost noon and there wasn't a single plant in sight that needed tending. Her porch, I noticed for the first time, had a rectangle of grass a shade greener than the rest of her lawn, right where the moss patch had been. Nobody had reseeded it. It had simply grown back on its own, faster than grass has any business growing. "You're not sleeping," she said, before I'd even finished my first sentence. Not a question. I told her about the flyer, the purple lights, and the cat. I watched her face for some flicker of surprise and got none. She just nodded along, the way you'd nod at someone describing a movie you'd already seen twice. "My husband didn't follow it either," she said. "First year we lived here. Stubborn man. God rest him." She said this the way other people mention a mild inconvenience, a delayed flight, or a canceled dentist appointment. It's not cruel if that's what you're picturing. It just collects what's already there. You'd be amazed how little most people miss him. I asked her what that meant, what exactly got collected, and she looked at me with something that might have been pity. "You already know," she said. "You've seen the shadows. Some of us just decided it's less frightening to cooperate than to spend years fighting something that was never going to lose." Then she smiled, thin and polite, the smile of someone who made peace with a decision a long time ago and doesn't appreciate being asked to relitigate it. "Sleep, Leo. It really is easier that way." I walked home considerably less reassured than I had walked over. At 3:30, unmarked white vans rolled down Vantage Ridge Court, slow and quiet, moving with the unhurried patience of a funeral procession. 4 of them, headlights off. Men in full hazmat suits stepped out, and here's what unsettled me more than the suits themselves. They weren't searching. They weren't sweeping yards with flashlights, hunting for an intruder or a stray animal. They moved directly to specific porches, like they'd been handed a list ahead of time, and began scraping patches of that same iridescent moss into sealed containers with the kind of practiced efficiency you only get from doing something many, many times before. I watched one man kneel at Corinne's front step, The same Corinne who'd told me to just follow it, easier that way, and he collected a patch roughly the size of a welcome mat. She hadn't been outside. I checked my own recollection twice, then checked the porch light timer she always left running, and there was no version of that night where she'd stepped outside during the window. Which meant either the moss had grown from something she'd left out there, a plant or a doormat, something ordinary, or it had grown from something that used to be Corinne, and either possibility kept me up considerably longer than my insomnia usually managed on its own. Except, of course, Corinne had just told me herself, in gardening gloves on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly what it meant, and I hadn't wanted to believe her yet. One of the hazmat workers looked up while he worked. Not at the house, at my window. He held perfectly still for a few seconds, the way Biscuit had held still, and then he lifted one gloved hand and pressed 2 fingers to the side of his own wrist. Not checking a watch. There was no watch there, just checking his own skin the way you'd check a bruise to see if it was still tender. Then he went back to scraping moss into his container like nothing had happened at all. I didn't sleep the rest of that night either, though by that point I'd stopped expecting to, and I couldn't stop thinking about what it meant that the man collecting the evidence checked himself for it first. 3 nights later, I found the logbook. One of the vans idled a little too long outside my place while a worker jogged back for a forgotten container, and a stack of shredded paper slid loose from an unlatched side door onto the curb. Most of it was confetti, useless, but one strip, maybe 8 inches long, had survived the shredder intact enough to read. Long-term subdermal viability study. Forced evolutionary spurring initiative. Subject retention rate improving in Sector 12 relative to Sectors 4 through 9. Recommended expansion curfew window pending. Forced evolutionary spurring? I sent a photo of that scrap to Darla, and for the first time in our entire friendship, she didn't have a joke ready. She just wrote back, "Okay, now I believe you enough to be scared," and asked if I wanted her to come stay with me. I told her no. I don't know why I told her no. Maybe some part of me already understood that whatever this was, it wasn't the kind of thing you could protect a person from just by being in the room with them. I want to tell you I felt clever for finding the scrap of paper. I didn't. I felt like a man who'd been quietly reading his own personnel file without permission, and had just found the page where somebody, somewhere, had written down exactly how replaceable he was. Darla showed up on my doorstep 2 days later anyway, overnight bag over one shoulder, the same stubborn look on her face she used to get whenever a customer on the call center line demanded to speak to a supervisor she had no intention of transferring them to. "You said no," I told her. "I heard you say no," she said. "I just didn't agree to it." She'd brought a folding cot, a thermos of coffee strong enough to strip paint, and a printed stack of public records requests she'd already filed with 3 different county offices before she'd even packed a bag. That was Darla's version of comfort I'd learned over 15 years of friendship. Not soft words, paperwork, and proximity. We sat up together that night, the first time in 6 weeks I hadn't watched the window alone. At 3, the streetlights turned and Darla went very still and very quiet in a way I'd never seen from her before. Not once. Not even the year her marriage fell apart. She didn't see a shadow bloom. Nothing sprouted on our lawn. The 17 minutes simply passed, tense and silent, and when the purple drained away, she let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. "Nothing happened," she said. "Not to you," I said. It wasn't until later, lying awake after she'd finally drifted off on the cot, that I understood why. She'd had one night. I'd had a decade of 3 in the mornings before the flyer ever showed up on my windshield. Years of accidental wakefulness in a window I never knew was being measured. Whatever the mandate was counting, it wasn't counting the night. It was counting the hours, and I'd been unknowingly banking mine since I was 19 years old. She left the following afternoon, reluctantly, promising to call every day, and true to her word, she did. I never told her about the public records requests coming back empty, every single one. The county having no file, no permit, no ordinance, nothing. I didn't want to hear how quiet she'd go this time. I did what anyone with a decade of insomnia and too much time on their hands would do next. I went looking for the source. City Hall had never heard of Urban Mandate 12-C, and the woman at the front desk looked at me like I'd asked her about a conspiracy theory rather than a piece of paper I'd found under my own windshield wiper. The water utilities customer service line put me on hold for exactly 40 minutes before a recorded voice thanked me for my patience and hung up entirely. I drove out to the address, printed in a tiny gray text at the very bottom of the flyer, a suite number in an office park 2 towns over, and found a building directory with no suite matching that number at all. Just a hallway of frosted glass doors for insurance agencies and a dentist's office that, absurdly, made me think of Corinne again. Whoever was running this, they weren't hiding badly. They weren't hiding at all. They simply didn't exist anywhere a person was supposed to be able to find them, which is a very different and much colder kind of secrecy. I stood in that office park parking lot for a long time, long enough that a woman from the dentist's office came out on a smoke break and asked if I was lost. I told her I was looking for a water utility office, and she laughed, not unkindly, and said nobody had leased that suite number in the 8 years she'd worked there. She asked why I wanted it. I said something vague about a billing dispute, and she nodded like that explained everything, the way people nod at any story involving a utility company, because we've all had a bad enough experience with one to believe almost anything. Driving home, I kept catching myself checking the rearview mirror at all stoplights, half expecting them to already be shifting color. even though it wasn't anywhere near 3 in the morning. That's the part nobody warns you about with something like this. It doesn't just live in the 17 minutes anymore. It moves into every other hour of your day, too, quietly, until you're flinching at ordinary sodium light on a Tuesday afternoon. I stopped watching after The Office Park. For 2 weeks, I forced myself to stay in bed with my eyes shut during the window, even though actual sleep never came for more than a few stolen minutes at a time. I hoped that closed eyes were close enough to whatever documented meant to whoever was doing the documenting. I told myself I'd made peace with not understanding. I told myself a lot of things at 3 a.m. that felt considerably less true by the time the sun came up. Darla checked in every few days. "Are you sleeping?" she'd ask, and I'd say something that was technically true and completely useless, like, "I'm resting," which is a phrase insomniacs learn to deploy the way other people say, "fine." I started checking my hands every morning before I even got out of bed, turning them over in the gray light, telling myself I was being paranoid, that 10 sleepless years could do that to anyone's nerves. For a while, there was nothing, just ordinary hands, a little too pale, nails a little too bitten down from stress. I almost let myself believe the whole thing might simply stop. The way storms sometimes stall out over open water and never make landfall at all. Then, on a Thursday, 19 days after Darla's visit, came the message. "Thank you for your wakeful contribution to the 3 a.m. window, Leo. Your spores will be collected shortly." Not residence, not subject 12C. My name, spelled correctly, first name only, in the exact casual register a neighbor might use, or an app that had known me a little too well for a little too long. I looked down at my hands under the kitchen light, turning them over slowly, the way you check for a splinter you already suspect is there before you've even seen it. Along the edge of my left thumbnail, just beneath the surface, was a thin crescent of green. Not a bruise, not a stain from something I'd touched. It had a shimmer to it, faint and oily, the exact color of the moss that used to be a cat named Biscuit, the exact color of whatever had been scraped off Corinne's front step while she was, according to every reasonable explanation, safely asleep inside her own house. It didn't hurt. That's the detail I keep circling back to, the one that unsettles me more than the color itself. It didn't hurt at all. I called Darla after I saw the crescent under my nail. I got 2 words into the sentence before my voice gave out entirely, and she didn't ask me to finish. She just said she was coming over, and this time I didn't tell her no. She's asleep on the cot in my living room right now, 12 feet from where I'm sitting, and I haven't decided yet whether that makes me feel safer or whether it just means there will be 2 of us in this house when the collection finally comes. I don't know how long the collection window is. I don't know if I'll be awake for it, or if by that point it won't matter one way or the other whether I'm awake. What I do know is that somewhere out there is a filing cabinet or a server rack or whatever they use now, with 17 minutes of my nervous system logged inside it every single night, and a very patient organization that has apparently quietly decided I'm ready. There's a van outside right now. I can hear it, idling at the curb, engine running low and even, the way it's been running for the last 4 minutes while I've been sitting here writing this down instead of looking out the window to check. I don't know if it's been there the whole time or if it just arrived. I've decided I'd rather finish this sentence than find out. If you live somewhere quiet, somewhere upscale, a place that's a bit more refined, with great schools, lovely homes, and streetlights that look like they've just been installed, check your windshield tomorrow morning, and if you find a flyer under your wiper blade, do yourself a favor that I never managed to do for myself. Go to sleep. I'm Dark Veil. If Leo's tail got under your skin, you might want to check out the video linked on the screen. But before you go, tell me something. If you found that flyer under your wiper blade tomorrow morning, would you follow the mandate? Or would you stay awake just to see what's watching you back? Stay careful.